Okay, good morning, and thank you to everyone for joining us. My name is Patrick Sims. I'm the Director of Policy and Research at the Hunt Institute, and we're excited for today's conversation with Superintendent Eric Mackey from Alabama, Superintendent Carrie Wright from Mississippi, and Laura Fornash, Senior Vice President, McGuire Woods Consulting, and former Secretary of Education of Virginia. This conversation today, we're hoping will be highly interactive, and we are encouraging each of you to submit your questions. Some of you have already started doing so, so thank you for that. You will remain on mute, and your video will be off during the duration of the webinar, but please do use that Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen to join in on the discussion. And we also encourage you to tweet using the hashtag, let me make sure I have the right hashtag, #EdHomeroom. Hashtag #EdHomeroom. Please do tweet and feel free to put questions and comments there as well, and we will try to engage with you through that medium as well. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our President and CEO, Dr. Javed Siddiqui, to provide some opening remarks. Javed?
Morning. Thank you, Patrick. Thanks to everybody for joining us today. A special thank you to Superintendent Carrie Wright of Mississippi, Superintendent Eric Mackey of Alabama, and Laura Fornash, former Secretary of Education of Virginia, and one of my bosses, a board member at the Hunt Institute. Thank you to all three of you for making time. I know how busy you are all during this time. We appreciate you taking the opportunity to be with us, especially now as states and districts are opening schools and grappling with extremely difficult questions. It is important for us to have open and honest conversations about these challenges schools and educators are facing, as well as potential strategies for best serving students in the coming school year. Our conversation today will focus on grade transitions, students entering the school year not only in a new grade, but sometimes in an entirely new school building after being out of the physical classroom for 5 months, and many more that will begin their year virtually. There's still so much uncertainty. During this time, students have faced a tremendous amount of uncertainty and sometimes insecurity and tragedy. As students start a new school year, whether in a physical classroom or virtually, it is going to be crucial that they're offered high quality, thoughtful, and individualized supports to set them up for success. I'm so grateful to all of you for working diligently to support students in these efforts. Today, we're grateful to hear from 2 state leaders who are doing important work in supporting their districts and students. And one thing I know for sure is I wouldn't want to be either one of them, so I'm thankful for their leadership. With that, thank you for all that you're doing. Patrick, I'll turn it over to you to get our conversation started.
Great, thanks so much, Javed. And let me preface, I'm on the phone, so hopefully my audio will be clear, but my wife is downstairs teaching right now, and so our broadband is being used to the maximum. So if my video is freezing, apologies. First, I'd like to come to Laura Fornash. Laura, you had a range of roles in education, and we'd love to hear your perspective a little bit on the way that educators across the country are responding creatively to the challenges that they're facing right now. What are some of the ways, particularly as it relates to transitions and important benchmarks and rates of passages, that educators and school leaders are responding today?
Well, thank you, Patrick, for the question, and thank you, Patrick and Javed, for the opportunity to participate in this webinar. I'm so grateful to all that the Hunt Institute is doing during this time to bring together educators and policymakers to talk about these challenging situations that COVID-19 has presented us with. I'm also particularly honored to be here today with Dr. Wright and Dr. Mackey, 2 folks that are on the front lines. And I, like Javed, am glad that I'm not sitting in their chairs right now, but I'm very appreciative of all that they're doing for kids in their states, and thankful that they're here today to share some of the lessons that they've learned and some of the things that they're focusing on. My comments today will primarily focus on the high school to post-secondary transition, as that's the majority of my background is working for higher education institutions and then at the state level. But I have personal experience with these transitions. I'm a mother first. I have 3 kids that are dealing with this at a variety of different stages. I have a rising 7th grader, a rising 11th grader, and a rising senior. And so I've watched them transition to online learning rather quickly in the spring, and was trying to explain to my rising 7th grader last night about why it makes sense that we're going back to school after we shut down schools when we had very few cases of the virus, and now we're going, full-fledged back to school when we have lots of cases of the virus and concerns about spreading. So I think that's very much how we're dealing with things now, and in the environment that we're in. When we look to our transition to spring, it was very much in an emergency situation and in a way to quickly get students online. But there was, a bit of fumbling in some states as we tried to figure that out. We extended spring break in many areas to see if we could have some time, maybe that we wouldn't have to cancel classes entirely. And then there was confusion about, are we going to advance kids? Are we going to focus them where they are? And I really think that this is where we've seen the heart of where educators really lies, and that's with helping their students. And when we look at, how superintendents stepped up, how principals stepped up, how teachers stepped up, how bus drivers stepped up, as well as our food service employees, trying to do whatever they could to make sure that students had the resources they need to continue in some fashion. And I just marvel at the creativity that we've seen with educators across the nation as they responded so quickly to this challenge. And I was very thankful when the media started focusing on these stories. We had, it seemed like a time in each broadcast where they would focus on what a local school was doing and highlighting these extraordinary efforts that we were seeing educators put forward. And so I know you all saw, and many of you probably participated in parades and other ways of recognizing students' accomplishments, the many graduation ceremonies that were held. I'd be curious from Superintendent Wright and Mackey on how many events like that they participated in. In Virginia, we did a virtual statewide graduation ceremony where we had national celebrities that had Virginia ties participate in it, as well as students and the governor, to really try to make this transition special, to make their accomplishments feel special. We know that summer camp or many of the instructional summer programs had to move online, and you probably all saw the summer camp in a box, a very creative way of trying to reach out to students and families and provide opportunities to continue learning in a fun way. I also saw, and hopefully in your states you've experienced this type of support as well, but the public radio and TV stations that stepped up to provide instructional supports. So many of these things were done quickly and done without a lot of time to really make sure that they were going to work, but they did, and they were just so essential, especially to families that don't have computers or internet access. I also, marveled at the innovative ways that localities were able to provide Wi-Fi access. You saw a lot of buses being transformed into Wi-Fi hotspots. And I love the story of Louisa County, a rural county in Virginia, that developed these kind of mobile Wi-Fi units that they built. The facility staff built themselves for a cost of $2,000. They partnered with Verizon so that they could move these units around the county so that families and students could come in and download their coursework. So we've definitely seen a tremendous amount of creativity and innovation, and the Federal CARES Act dollars have been extremely important to accomplishing this. We were able to secure $3 billion for governors to allocate specifically to education. And I know governors struggled with those decisions. Some governors are still struggling with those decisions and how to really spread those dollars far between early childhood education and post-secondary education. But we've been very fortunate to have those resources, as well as the resources that have gone to the state education agencies. And those have been vital to providing some statewide supports that I know you'll hear about in just a few minutes. I also found it interesting as some states were actually trying to push some of those educational dollars down to families, and Oklahoma in particular used some of their CARES Act funding to provide to families, for low-income families, to either provide devices or access to Wi-Fi. So we've definitely seen tremendous creativity, flexibility, and educators being nimble. And I think those are really the themes that will continue into this fall.
Thank you so much, Laura. It's a great way to get the conversation started. And next, we're going to come to Superintendent Eric Mackey of Alabama. Superintendent, could you discuss a little bit about how Alabama is thinking about ensuring equitable student transitions during this period, understanding that this is a particularly tough time for students to make these different grade and building transitions. So we'd love to hear a little bit about both in the short term and the long term, how you're thinking about supporting students through those transitions.
Absolutely. And I also appreciate Patrick and Javade being invited and having the opportunity to discuss this with colleagues and with other folks around the country. So we also, just a little background, as we look back to March, we were one of those states that early on, I think we were the 4th state that said we were just going to close for the whole year and not reopen because we saw the struggles that were coming forward. And then, of course, we all had to do that. And I mention that because when I think back to March 13th, what seems like a century ago, some of our systems were ready. So I know in particular one district, they were already one-to-one computers. They were already using digital textbooks. Their students were already using online forums like Google Classroom to turn in their work. And so they transitioned pretty smoothly. Their teachers set up Zoom calls with students. They were able to do lessons online, going back and forth. Both they could do lecture and turn their work in and these kind of things. And we had another district that made literally 2 million copies at a cost of $60,000 because they did not have the digital devices. Just as much caring educators, great school system, actually pretty high performing, but they had not made the digital shift already, so they were really caught flat-footed. And then again, there are places like I'm actually in a high school today in Greensboro, Alabama, very rural. It's way out. We're here with the Alabama Department of Public Health and the Centers for Disease Control doing a walkthrough of how classrooms can be best set up, talking about breakfast service, lunch service, those kind of things. So I've taken a break off of the walkthrough to have some time with you, but this is a very rural community. It's 90% free and reduced lunch. And so they're going to have challenges with devices and connectivity that other parts of the state don't have. And I know all of our states are dealing with that. So as we think about transitioning forward, we've talked about investments. So Laura mentioned investments. I want to mention a couple of those. And then the big issue is professional development for teachers. So teachers who were not already used to doing some online learning, they have had a really steep learning curve in a very short few weeks. So some of the things we've invested in, she mentioned buses. We actually have been able to use part of our CARES funding. The governor invested all of her gear funding in Alabama in K-12 schools. So that gave us a $48 million infusion that we are using for before and after school tutoring, for take-home books and kits for teachers to send home with students, and then to make every school bus in the state a mobile Wi-Fi hotspot. We already had about 1% of our buses that were mobile, had mobile Wi-Fi capacity. But now we'll have close to 100% capacity. Takes a little bit of time. One of the issues, grab my water. One of our issues is we have to order those things. And so, we've had supply chain problems getting equipment in, but the money has been there, thanks again to the CARES funding. We've invested also in digital devices. Again, there's some supply chain issues. The superintendents who saw this coming, and back in March and April began ordering new laptops and iPads and mobile Wi-Fi and those devices, they are getting their stock in. But the folks who waited until August to order, many of them are not going to get their stuff for many more months. And so there's a real supply chain problem there. We've also invested in internet vouchers. So last week, the governor announced that she was going to spend $100 million for internet vouchers. So I get internet hooked up at my home. If my child qualifies for free or reduced lunch, then the state will pay for the connection and pay for the service charge through December. And that, we think that's going to run about $400 per household. Our providers have actually been really good about giving us cut rate prices on that. And so that'll help connect many students. Between that and the mobile Wi-Fi on buses, all of our public libraries now have free internet access in the parking lot, so you can pull up to a public library and get access. But in an Alabama summer, I'm sure it's the same in Mississippi and Virginia, it's pretty hot to be sitting in the public library parking lot doing your homework during the day. So yes, it helps, but it's really not a long-term solution. So we think the internet vouchers will help. And then, of course, we're still going to have students who are off the grid enough that there's not a connection. So we're having to work through other things with them. And then we've, gosh, I don't know why all of a sudden I'm having to clear my throat, but I've been talking a lot this morning. So the other issue is working with the Department of Public Health. As I mentioned, we're here today with Public Health and CDC looking at a school and creating what we're trying to create is a virtual walkthrough experience. So principals and school nurses can connect with a healthcare professional back in Montgomery they can walk through the school with a laptop or with a mobile phone and show the room and show how they have things set up and get on the spot guidance from a public health expert on these are some things you need to consider in that room. And we're even talking about things like washing hands and of course food service and all of those kind of loading buses, unloading buses, all those issues that we're having to deal with. About 70% of our students will be in remote learning on their first day of school. And so we realize that this is going to create a large gap for us in what students are getting. So everybody knows that there is no replacement for an in-classroom experience with a high-quality teacher. And that's what we all want, but that's not going to be possible in every situation. And at the beginning of school, it's not going to be possible for us, for the majority of our students. So we're having to think, what are the things we can do to go back, again, professional development for teachers. We've got to have those devices, yes. We've got to have connectivity, yes. And we're tackling those challenges. But the real challenge is helping teachers understand that teaching online is very different from what they've done before. And it's hard to know if students are falling behind, that they are falling behind, because you can't look over their shoulder, you can't look them in the eye, you can't do an on-the-spot assessment and know whether those students are really getting it or not. Plus, we don't have that connection to know what's happening at home. So when a student signs up, like we are today in a virtual meeting, and thank goodness we can do virtual now, so it helps, but it's not the same as that in person. So we're all worried about students that don't have good supports at home, or even worse, maybe in a really bad situation at home, and they don't have that adult, that teacher that they would normally count on as being the kind of stability in their life. So, we talk about this transition and the equity piece. Those are all the pieces we're looking at. But that last one is the piece that we're most worried about, I think, right now. And that's the connectivity to structure and stability and what that means for a child's mental health, and especially with younger children. I would say if there's a group that we are most worried about, it's those pre-K through third grade students, because it's really difficult to teach reading virtually. And it's a skill that most teachers haven't developed. Even the very best reading teachers have not developed the skill maybe of doing that in the format like we are today. It's really tough to do. And it takes a lot of practice. And unfortunately, we're not going to have that time. So we're going to move forward and provide as equitable opportunities as we can. And then the thing we are really struggling with also is how assessment fits into this. We don't think it's time to throw out assessment, because if there's any time when we need to assess how our children are doing and to know how they're progressing, it's now. But at the same time, we don't want to put too much high stakes pressure on our schools where they see assessment as the end goal. But assessment can't be the end goal. It's got to be a means to finding out where students really are and how we can help those students. And we all know that this is not going to be, it's not a few weeks. Some people back in March thought, oh gosh, by May we'll be back to normal. But we weren't back to normal by May, nor by the 4th of July, nor by August. And we're not going to be back to normal in December, and likely through this school year. And we're going to have continual problems. So we're going to have to struggle with those. And all through this, I think, and especially on the other end, we really got to have strong assessments that help our teachers know where the gaps are, because there are going to be gaps. Let's not lie to ourselves. And we have to struggle with helping teachers identify those gaps and then close them in, so that we, 2 or 3 years from now, unfortunately, I don't want to sound depressed, but it's going to take some time to get back to normal. And that, of course, that new normal may look different on the other end anyway. But those are all the things we're struggling with. And again, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today and look forward to the questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Superintendent. It was a great way to move into the next piece, and I think we'd love to hear some of your reflections on that. Superintendent Carrie Wright from Mississippi, what are some of the key challenges you're facing? I know many of them are similar, but how are you all addressing and thinking about them both in the short and long term in Mississippi?
Well, thank you for having me. As Eric said, it's a pleasure to be here, and much of what Superintendent Mackey has described is exactly, what we're going through as well. If there's one thing that this COVID disease and virus has shown us are the inequities that exist across our state between children that could immediately pivot to having online and having connection with the internet and those that were not. And we took advantage of that. We felt it was a moral imperative that we just couldn't say, yeah, isn't that awful? So our legislature happened to be in session for a longer period of time this year because it was an election year for us as a new governor. And so we worked with the legislature to get two very significant bills passed that would give the state $200 million in order to basically put a device in each child's hand across the state, and also money to attach for connectivity, whether that's broadband, hotspots, whatever that happens to be. So we are now in the process of these devices. We did a huge needs assessment across our state. We asked each superintendent, what is it that you need? What is it that you need in way of hotspots? Do you have a learning management system? That's critical because that's the ability then for schools to load high quality content onto an LMS, and then children can download that content onto their devices. We asked them about connectivity, we asked them about professional development, and we also included an expansion of telehealth and teletherapy, and I want to talk to you about that in just a second. So each of these devices are going to be either Wi-Fi or cellular enabled, and we figured that with as many phones that are out there, connecting to a cell tower has a little bit more of an advantage right now than connecting to the internet. And so we're now in the process of going through the purchasing piece of that, and Eric is right. Supply chain is going to be an issue, but we've got to move forward on that. We have been providing virtual professional development around that. I've got a very large teacher advisory council, and that's the one thing they said to me, gosh, if I'd known this, I would have done a whole lot more studying on how you set up a Google Classroom or how you set up a Zoom call, something of that nature. And they were all saying, well, if there's one thing we need to hone our skills on, it's that as well. But the one thing that we're excited about that. This will be the first time that we've really taken on a huge initiative of this nature across the state, because a lot of our teachers, Eric is right, they're going to continue to need professional development because pivoting to virtual learning is a very different skill set. And we've got a lot of talented teachers, I think, who are anxious about that, but we're going to do our best to work through that. We also wanted to expand the telehealth and teletherapy because as time went on, we also were hearing stories about the stress that was going on in homes, stress on teachers' parts, social emotional learning issues that we knew we needed to address. So the moment I announced that this was going to be a part of our overall plan, the Mississippi chapter of the Medical Association reached out to me, and the Mississippi chapter of the Academy of Pediatrics reached out to me and said, please count us in on this. How can we help you? So it's really formed a great way for us to work together along with our Department of Health, because the Department of Health and the health officer have just been amazing in terms of meeting with my superintendents virtually, supplying them with decision-making matrix on what to do when and if, and also the best guidance around when we return to school, what should that look like, what should be happening. We've been pushing out a daily update to our superintendents. I think 2 weeks ago, we started twice a week, but giving them the resources that they need in order to make the decisions that they needed to make. At the same time, to address the social emotional piece, we have developed social emotional learning standards, and we have been working with CASEL on that and on their model. And if there's one thing that we know that children are going to need to feel safe when they come back, And we also want to build children's capacity to manage tasks and manage challenges. And that's part of what we teach with social emotional learning. And obviously transitioning back to school, whether it's to the school you were at or to a new grade or to new school, is certainly going to be one of those challenges. We've also developed online courses for our teachers, and that around social emotional learning and what does that look like and how do we infuse that in the classroom, but it's not a standalone, but it's a way of building a culture and a classroom environment where children know that this is a safe space for them and that their learning can continue. We also knew that our teachers were going to need a lot of help when school resumed. So we've put together instructional planning guides for every grade in ELA, math, and science. And that will help teachers then to know how to plan lessons moving forward. I had teachers say to me, well, should I pick up the standards that we had in the fourth quarter and start with those in the fall? And I said, absolutely not. You know, remediation does not work, right? And there's that whole report that came out called the opportunity myth about meeting kids where they are, although well-intentioned, is insufficient. So we've said to our teachers, use these planning guides, start with on-grade level standards, and then we need to think about accelerating learning, not remediating learning. Children need to move forward. I said, if you start teaching them on-grade level standards, you're going to know which ones they may have missed, and then infuse that in your teaching. But don't go back. I said, if you go back and pick up last year's standards, you're going to be behind forever. You'll never catch up. So start with the current year standards to do that. And I think the other thing we've done, we've built out our website for parents, because we were hearing from parents as well. And we've got an amazing website set up for parents by grade that focuses on literacy. And so parents can click on the grade, can click on what it is that they want to do, and that will be something that we'll be doing, helping them at home. We've also planning webinars for our parents, because our parents have been talking about how stressed they are, the same way that our teachers are talking about how stressed they are. And this is a time that everybody's got to come together for the whole child. And I think that we've really got to be thinking not only of children academically, but social and emotionally, because you can't learn when you're stressed. And I think that's the part, whether it's a teacher, whether it's a superintendent or a principal, and Lord knows these jobs are stressful enough as it is, but add on to that a pandemic, and we've got to figure out a way that we all come together to support each other as well, socially, emotionally, as well as academically.
Thank you so much, Superintendent Wright. It's a great way to build on what we just heard from Superintendent Mackey, and I think some of the things we'll come back to shortly. Laura, I'd like to come back to you, and as we think about the transitions into higher education, what is it that the districts and schools should really be thinking about to support students as they make that transition right now, coming from high school to a very different post-secondary landscape? What are some of the things that students really need in order to make sure they're ready for it, given our current circumstances?
Sure. Thanks, Patrick. I thought that it might be best if my 16-year-old daughter respond to some of this, because a lot of what I think is so important is communication and finding out ways to communicate with young people that they're going to be receptive to. You know, you don't develop a video and send them an email, because that's not something that they're going to be responsive to. And so I think it's important to really look at, you know, using social media, using text messages. There's a lot more research out there these days that are showing that you need to, you know, communicate with students in a way that they're used to being communicating with their friends. And so I think that's, you know, really important. And you don't want to lose touch during this important time, because, you know, there's a lot of talk right now out there about a gap year. And I think especially for, you know, first generation college students, low income college students, that's really the last thing that we want to see. And so we want to make sure that we're making the transition easy, that we're putting things at students' fingertips. Superintendent Wright's comment about parents, I think that's a really important stakeholder group at this point. You know, are there opportunities to be Zooming with parents and talking about that transition process and what parents can do when you've got parents and family members that are engaged? And so I think communicating is extremely important. Advisors, you know, kind of taking on new roles and you know, figuring out how they can be resources. I've heard of this new position, a remote student specialist. And so these are individuals that are working at the institutional level, reaching back out to students if they are, noticing that they're not signing into Blackboard accounts and other things. They're reaching back, and they're really making sure that students have the supports that are needed. And so a lot of these things we've got in place, but we really need to turn up the volume on them and make sure that we're kind of taking those extra steps that we've taken in the past, but need to emphasize even more. I heard about faculty members in Kentucky actually reaching out to students and writing them letters about, coming to the institution and being prepared and how can they be of support. And so I really think, again, we've got to use this theme of creativity. I also think and would be curious with Superintendent Wright and Superintendent Mackey about dual enrollment. We've talked about dual enrollment for years, and there's kind of this struggle of who pays for it, how is it delivered, where is it delivered. Well, now it's just critical that we provide students with opportunities to take dual enrollment classes, and we're seeing it happen in a variety of different ways across the nation. You've got some states that have state laws that mandate a certain amount of dual enrollment that each student should be able to access. We've got other states who have offered summer dual enrollment classes. So if you're a senior, are there opportunities for you to take dual enrollment that puts you in an environment where you're going to get some advising, you're going to get your foot in the door, and oftentimes they're going to help you think about the next step. And so I think we got to look back at all of those creative pathways that we've been creating for the past 10 plus years. This is really the time where we need them. I would also say it's an opportunity to tap into business again. I think, businesses are learning how to operate in this online virtual environment. Are there lessons that we can learn from businesses and corporations? Are there ways that we can take, what may be their vacancies and their jobs that they have and develop those into pathway programs that maybe combine dual enrollment and some type of work experience? And so I think this is a great way for local superintendents, principals to be knocking on businesses' door and helping to make these transitions. I would also say that another important tool that we've talked about a lot with this transitional piece is completing the FAFSA. I think we have 3 states now in the nation that require it: Louisiana, Illinois, and Texas, and they're seeing significant gains in their college going rate. And I know how it is, even for my student who's only taken 1 test, the mail that we get, encouraging my son to apply to various colleges and universities, and how valuable that information is, and letting a young person know that maybe hasn't thought about college, that there are opportunities and that there are ways to pay for it. And so I think we really need to think about, creative ways to encourage the FAFSA, but then also innovative programs and supports that come with that. So it's not just a state saying, hey, we're going to require the FAFSA to be completed. It's programming that also is kind of packaged around that to support students, to ensure that they know how to do that, that their parents know how to do that, that there are opportunities for them to get those supports. And so that would be something that I would also, be thinking about as states are really looking at what can they do from a policy and programmatic state to make sure we don't lose kids during that transition.
Thank you so much, Laura. And I will note that as it relates to FAFSA, in 2 days, we have a brief coming out specifically around the challenges of continuing to help students complete the FAFSA during COVID-19 that we worked on with the Education Commission of the state. So look out for that as well, and we'll include that in the key takeaways. Superintendent Mackey, let me pause for a moment and just remind folks to feel free to please chat in your questions in the Q&A, and we'll get to them as we can. Superintendent Mackey, coming back to you, I've heard all 3 of you today in the discussion talk about the other needs that students have beyond strictly academic, and think about social, emotional, and other routines that have been disrupted. What are some of the state level ways that you all are thinking about to support students in these non-academic needs? And we heard, for example, Superintendent Wright talk about developing standards around social emotional learning, but what are some of the things that you're working on specifically?
Unmute myself. It's a concern for all of us, I think, as we talk about going into this school year. And again, it was already a rising issue, and now it really has kind of come to the top all of a sudden. So let me talk just a little bit about how we support the social emotional with the physical. One of the things that we certainly learned in the spring was that families with young children especially, but really children of all ages, really depended on the school for food. And I mentioned earlier the stability piece, but we fed millions of meals where students came to school and picked up meals, and where we delivered meals actually to homes using school buses. Now, one of the things we're a little concerned about going into this year is that USDA has not extended that waiver, and so we will not be able to deliver meals to homes as we did before. That students can still come pick up meals, and they can come pick up multiple meals at a time, and we appreciate that opportunity. But we liked being able to take meals out because, one, it allowed us to, again, lay eyes on a child at that home. And so there just is some connection there in trying to figure out the situation that students were in. And we did identify across the state some bad situations that needed public health or our Department of Human Resources to get involved, because we were spending those routes going out and delivering food. So we're a little worried that we will not have any of that this school year. As far as social emotional learning, we were already in the process. Our legislature had made that a priority this year to hire basically school social workers, though they don't have to be social workers. They may be mental health counselors, but at least one for every school system in the state. So that bill was already moving forward. The legislature interrupted the session by 2 or 3 weeks. When they came back, they had a 4-day session. And during that time, again, they prioritized social emotional learning. So they went ahead and funded that. So we're in the process now of hiring those social workers or counselors in every school district across the state. It will be helpful. Of course, it's not the end all be all, because it's like school nurses. We'd like to have more of them. And then we are now focusing on what we can do with telehealth and how we can support those people so that as soon as they get started, many of them will be starting this month and next month in the schools. So what resources do they need so they can immediately begin working with students? And again, I point out, these are not therapists. And we already have therapists in 92 of our 142 school districts, and we will be expanding that with the Department of Mental Health. This year, across about 3 years, we hope to have mental health therapists working in every school. But these are not therapists. These are people who can go in and do traditional social work kind of activities, identifying where there are problems, where there are additional needs, and then making references to community agencies or other departments that are better suited to help with therapy and those kind of things. But as you know, in many cases, so what we're seeing is incidental social emotional problems. So they're having social emotional problems because dad is out of work. There's food insecurity. There's more stress on the family because the family's having to take over the educational responsibilities that they normally would not have. And then, of course, people are worried about catching COVID, or maybe they know somebody in the family who's had it and been seriously ill or passed away. And so there's all this additional emotional stress on the family that's being pushed down to children. And in many cases, of course, it's not intended, but children absorb the stress of the adults around them. And that's why we want to have, even though, again, most of our students will be remote learning, we want to have these counselors in place that can reach out to families and help identify. And then one other thing I want to say about that, Patrick, and that's the important role of a teacher in this. So one of the things that we saw in the spring, and in fact, the school district where my son, I have one child still in high school, and in his district, the superintendent said every teacher, every homeroom teacher must make a personal connection with every family during the month of March. And so they just called. They just got on the phone and they called every family, and they asked about their physical health. They asked if there was anything that the school system could do to help them physically, emotionally. Were they getting food they needed? Were they, what were the things that they needed? In some cases, the school could help. In some cases, the school could make a a referral to a local church or a food pantry or somebody who could help. And in some cases, they might not be able to help, but at least they knew that the school wanted to continue to make a connection with them. And maybe they needed to go see a medical provider or something that the school just couldn't do. But it makes that connection. And we've reemphasized that over and over with teachers. They have to make personal connections with their students and their families. And the reason I want to close my comments with that is we are worried about this fall and how school starts. I know before the conversation today, Carrie and I were talking a little bit about this starting remote or not. So we have some schools that are starting with students on campus, knowing that they're probably going to be closed down in 2 weeks, but because they want to personally meet those children. And that's the difference we have this fall than what we had in the spring. In the spring, they had known these children for 8 weeks. They knew the families. There was a personal connection, and then we closed down. But when you start up and you don't have that personal connection, there can be a lot more trouble trying to make connections later. So it's one of the things we're working on, trying to solve that issue.
Thank you, Superintendent Mackey. And I think you actually got to 2 of the submitted questions in the one answer, so I appreciate that. We did have a question that was about that, making that connection for students who are just entering for the first time and how you develop this relationship. So I appreciate you starting to answer that question. Superintendent Wright, would love to hear from you thinking about teacher PD, and we heard a little bit about, you referenced the opportunity myth and the need to accelerate learning rather than to focus on remediation. And what are some specific ways as it relates to teachers that you're thinking about offering professional development to allow them to be able to do that well? And if you would also like to comment on this question of how to support teachers developing relationships with students whom they've never had the opportunity to meet in person. Love to hear your thoughts there too.
Sure. So thank you. And let me start, Laura, you can add Mississippi to your list of FAFSA, because we require a college and career ready course that every child must take before they leave high school. And part of that requirement of that course is the completion of FAFSA. So that was the way we went at it, because we thought it was to tie it in with the context of something rather than just an isolated event, if you will. I think the one thing that I've got well over 250 teachers on my teacher advisory council. And so they are, which I love, and they're quite the vocal group, which I also enjoy. But they're the ones that are talking about, the support that they need and what does that look like. And so anytime, and I meet with them regularly throughout the year, and I met with them, I guess it was around May of this year, just to find out how things were going and what their needs were. And many of them were very vocal about the fact that this had been a very emotional drain on them as well. And so we are now working honestly with a company to think about how that does this kind of thing about providing support and self-care for individuals and teaching individuals how to provide that self-care for themselves. Teachers are very selfless people. And they give and give and give and give, and they don't stop to think about what it is that they need. And so we've been talking with this company about how could you help us in providing teachers what they need so that their own self-care is being addressed while they're busy running around caring for all the children and families. And I think that professional development for me has always been a key to the work that we do, because I believe in building the capacity of people. And I think that if you find out what it is that they need, then we can design that kind of professional development that's needed. I think that, like Eric just said, we've got a lot of teachers that are making phone calls, making sure that there's at least a voice with a name if it's not a Zoom call, sending out postcards, welcoming them to their classrooms. Prior to COVID, teachers would have probably had a field trip, established, if you're going from an elementary school to a middle school or a middle school to a high school, that was kind of traditional fare. And so now we've just got to think creatively about how to do that. Eric's talking about a virtual tour. What a great idea. What a great idea for all kids that are transitioning to a brand new school to be able to have a virtual tour of that school. I mean, I remember being a principal, and my 6th graders and 5th graders' worst nightmare was knowing how to open a locker, right? And we think about that now, we kind of laugh, but that was their panic. And so how do we make those things happen for children now so that they're not, the little things that we would never think about worrying about, children are actually worrying about. And so how can we get ahead of that and create those opportunities for them? But Laura talked about communication, and I can't say enough about that. We've got to know what's happening across our districts. Eric knows this as well as I do. And he's got a superintendent's advisory council, I'm sure, just like I do. You've got to have the voice of people who are boots on the ground. I have a student advisory council. And you talk about a group of kids that were very vocal about what they were getting and what they were not getting. But it was informative to us because we then needed to know how to drop back as a State Department then and provide the additional help that our schools and our districts needed so that children were feeling that their needs were being met as well. So it's communication all up and down. It's from the parent to the child to the school to the teacher, to the principal, to the superintendent, and all the way back down again. Because if you want to have a cohesive way about going about this, you've got to know what areas of the state need more of your attention than others, and how you help those people that are reaching out and asking for that help. This is not a job you do by yourself. Let me just put it to you that way.
States, and look forward to more of that happening. I wonder a question that was chatted in earlier and that we heard referenced about CARES Act funding. Laura referenced that earlier. Love a little for you all to kind of weigh in as you think about a potential next round of funding coming into your states, and what are some of the ways that you think that funding should be used and targeted that you see real opportunities. And Superintendent Wright, I think you look like you're ready to answer. Would you like to jump in first?
Yeah, I will, because that's something that I just was asked this question most recently, so thank you for that. I really want us to expand broadband, and I would really like us to look at some kind of worldwide broadband. There are companies out there that are doing that. I think that that's something, I appreciate the fiber up to the house, but the problem that we're finding is that when the FCC is seeing fiber up to one house, it knocks out the whole block and says the whole block has access, when in fact that is not the case. So, but if we had worldwide broadband, you know, via the satellite piece, then it wouldn't matter where you were, and it wouldn't matter where you lived. And we, you know, Eric's got a lot of rural parts of the state, just like I do, but we have got to be thinking down the road. I mean, hot spots are great, but they don't work everywhere. And so we've got to be thinking more broadly, because to me, this connectivity piece is a workforce development piece. This isn't just a K-12 or, you know, IHL issue. This is also workforce development. So if you've got people that are trying to get in to train people, they've got to be able to connect. So to me, I'm hoping that this next round is sufficient enough for us to really dig in deep around connectivity.
Great, thank you. And let me also just note that on Thursday, we have a discussion on this very topic with former Governor Bob Wise of West Virginia and former Governor Bev Perdue of North Carolina, both of whom care deeply about the broadband access issue and thinking about it. So for folks who want to join us on Thursday, please do. Superintendent Mackey, would you like to weigh in? I think we still have you.
Now, there we go. Yeah, I agree very much with what Carrie said. I think that long-term, the issue is broadband. You know, you're always looking for silver lining to bad storms. And I think the silver lining is here that people realize that this online accessibility is not, it's not a luxury. It's not an extra. It is something absolutely students have to have. They need to have now, but there will be more in the future. So one of the things that I think we will see from this, and I think a lot of my colleagues agree, is we won't go back to school the way school was in 2019. Now, hopefully we'll go back to something different from what's going on now, and we won't all be having to carry our face coverings around like I am today, but we're not going back to the way things were. And I think the expectation for online learning is going to be there, that we're going to have more blended, even for traditional students, we're going to have more blended opportunities than what we've had in the past. And this has really highlighted the inequitable opportunities that students have because when they go home, they're turned off. I'm going to give a really short personal story. During COVID, one night, now I was, years ago when I was a younger guy, I taught high school physics and chemistry. So I got up one morning at like 2 o'clock to go get some water and found that my son was upstairs and the light was on. And I went up there, and to my great surprise, he was doing chemistry at 2:30 in the morning. And so we sat there really for a couple of hours working through his chemistry homework. And that was good. You know, it's probably a little good father-son bonding time because we don't get a lot of that. I would rather not have been doing it at 2:30 in the morning. But it really opened my eyes, and I thought, oh my gosh, you know, for kids who don't have internet, and how are they going to even complete this assignment? And not to mention kids whose dad didn't teach chemistry 30 years ago, but I mean, they don't even have the connectivity to do the work. And so we're Googling resources, and he's got his laptop and I've got my laptop, and we're looking up sample problems, and we worked through all that. And by the time we finished, I was dreary-eyed and he was ready to go back to bed, but we got the work done. Okay, everybody does not have that access. We have parts of the state where if I have to drive to a public library and sit in the parking lot to get internet access, well, that's better than nothing, but that is not the same opportunity that my son has having high-speed internet at home and a device. So we absolutely have to solve that problem. That's something I hope that the Congress will really focus on. And the other piece that we really do want is for them to extend some timelines. So we actually have some money now that from CARES funding the governor has given us for devices for some healthcare stuff that we're going to have a hard time spending. I hate to say that out loud, between now and the end of December. And so one of the things we're hoping is that even the money we do have, they will extend the deadline through next spring, which I know has been discussed. So if they could help us with that, and they could really dig in on what does it take to have a national solution to broadband access. You know, we've done this before. So there were parts of this country 80 years ago that did not have an electrical line within 10 miles. And we said everybody has to have electricity. There are some things everybody has to have, and we solved that problem. So we've got to solve that problem for internet.
All right. Thank you, Superintendent. I appreciate your candor there.
Compliment, Patrick. Just emphasizing professional development. I think we've seen, you know, teachers go above and beyond being innovative in the classroom, but not all teachers can do that. And so I think we can't forget that we need to make sure that they have the tools in order to be able to provide the instruction in a way that can be well received. So that's my plug for more professional development resources.
Thank you, Laura, and that's a great point. We have one other question. I think we're running out of time, but I would like to ask this question, and we heard some reference to it from Superintendent Wright earlier, and Laura, you also spoke from the position of a parent, and the question was from Gabe Bogle about how to better engage parents, get them to understand how they can support their children, and especially how they can help make sure their children understand that this is still a real classroom, even if they're sitting at home, and how to get them to be deeply engaged. And so, Laura, if you would like to start from your perspective, both having been a state leader and as a parent, what do you think are some ways that we could work better with parents?
Well, this is a real challenge, and one we've been talking about for some time with students is how to engage parents. And I think that, you know, what's important is again, you know, communicating with parents and offering opportunities to Zoom, whether it's with, you know, teachers or with the principals, to really understand what it is, you know, the students will be doing and their challenges. I think so often, you know, parents, it's easy to get disconnected, and it's particularly challenging if you have two parents that are working outside the home. So finding creative ways, creative times, and I would imagine those are things that are, you know, happening with Superintendent Wright and Superintendent Mackey, but just, you know, reaching out to parents and explaining to them, you know, kind of what's going on, making it easy for them. You know, some parents may not have had a lot of experience with this, may not be Zooming, you know, all day, every day. And so trying to figure out ways to make it less threatening as they approach this with their child.
Thanks. And Superintendent Mackey, would you like to respond to that? And please feel free to also offer any other closing remarks.
Thank you, and I'll be really quick on that, but I agree completely. we've been trying to offer some online supports for parents how to use the learning management system. So we're moving toward one statewide learning management system. We were in the process of that already, but this has actually slowed things down because it's just hard to have the time to do so much. But we've done some online training for parents to understand how to download lessons, how to use the learning management system, how to stay in touch with their teachers. And I think we've just got to do more and more of that. I'm making notes. I appreciate what Carrie said about doing some statewide webinars for parents, something we have not done yet. Some of our districts have, but really those are things we have to do to help parents feel more comfortable with the situation that they're in.
Thank you. Superintendent, right?
I just want to, say ditto to what Eric just said. I just think that they are, I think, an untapped resource in many times. And I think for some parents that have those skill sets, it's easier. I was talking with my board chair, and even my CIO, who's got 4 kids and 4 different computers. So it's one thing, when he pivots to online. But I think about all these parents who that's just not their world. Their world has not been technology and the connection with technology. And so I think sometimes parents are just fearful. And so I think we need to build them up, build their capacity in order to be able to see not only what they can do to help their children, but what they can do to learn themselves, which also in turn, can make them more marketable. So I think there's another little piece of this that we may not have tapped into yet. Like how can we know what the kinds of things that our parents actually need to build their capacity, even as adults, to make them feel more successful, not only what they're doing in the home, what they're doing outside the home.
Well, thank you so much to all 3 of you for taking the time to join us today. We know clearly you have a lot on your plates, but I know that we're very fortunate to have the 3 of you working to help move things forward during this really challenging time. So we really appreciate you joining. And for everyone who's been listening, we heard a lot of great ideas today. So we'll be writing up a blog summarizing some of these great ideas. And we'll also be posting a recording of this webinar on our website. So please check back for that and feel free to share it with your networks as you feel appropriate. Also, feel free to tweet at us, as we mentioned earlier, and I do remember the hashtag #EdHomeroom. We welcome questions, and we'll try to get back to you as quickly as we can. I referenced one of these upcoming webinars earlier, but we also have tomorrow an upcoming premiere of Starting at Zero, Reimagining Education in America, talking about early learning, and you'll hear from some leaders from both of the states, all 3 of the states represented today on this call. So please join us for that tomorrow. We also do welcome you to join with our former governors on Thursday, and we have a host of other webinars coming up that you can find listed on our website. So please join us for as many as you can. Again, I just want to thank our panelists today. We're very fortunate to have you, and we wish you the best of luck with everything going forward, and we appreciate everybody for joining us today. So thank you all so much.
Thank you so much.